Alright. Tried to do Flat Earth twice now, but apparently I picked the wrong fucking YouTuber because all of his videos are just like so tedious. One of them had like absolute garbage audio quality. I know I'm not one to talk, but good God, I could barely understand what they were saying. And the other one was just two flat earthers, like, doing a fucking circle jerk. Like, going, oh, you're so right, you're so right. Like, it was so dumb. And it also had a bunch of, like, really annoyingly wrong photos that were just, like, slideshow style. Like, that was all I got to see while I was listening to these motherfuckers just, like, completely, like, come on each other over how right they thought they were. And it was just really fucking annoying. But anyway, we're gonna debunk this bastard again. Or is this... This is not...
For
I don't know
years,
if I've done this guy yet, but, you know...
evolutionists argued that science could demonstrate the truth of the story of evolution, in quotes like the following. Actually,
this is Answers in Genesis, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
there is superabundant
Answers in Genesis Canada.
evidence for animals evolving under our eyes. British moths becoming darker since the Industrial Revolution, industrial melanization. Insects evolving DDT resistance since World War II. Malaria parasites evolving chloroquine resistance in the last 2 decades, and new strains of flu virus evolving every few years to infect us. Christian apologetics ministries like Answers in Genesis have educated many Christians to the duplicitous tactics.
No, you don't get to say that. Because it's not education, it's indoctrination. Fuck you.
Evolutionists have often employed, such as the false equivocation of natural selection with biological evolution and the difference between empirical or observational science and historical science. These people have woken up to the fact that there's zero evidence of animals evolving under our eyes. And
literally all of the examples you just mentioned, the moths, the flu, like, those are evidence of things evolving under our eyes. You dumb fuck.
And yet, many layperson evolutionists persist in using these arguments, which even other evolutionists have debunked. A good example of this occurred recently on our Answers in Genesis Canada Facebook page, where a lady named Debbie, clearly an atheistic Bible skeptic, commented on one of our posts by declaring, "Evolution has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt many times over. Ignoring it, denying it as you do, does not change the facts." I then asked, "So evolution has been observed, proven?" And she said, "The peppered moth is one example. Peacocks and pesticide-resistant insects are 2 more. I can go on." So I sent her the following reply. "Well, Debbie, you might want to look into what you believe is observational evidence for evolution somewhat further. For example, famous evolutionary biologist L. Harrison Matthews, writing in the foreword to the 1971 edition of Darwin's Origin of Species, said this about the peppered moth example you mentioned. The experiments beautifully demonstrate natural selection, or survival of the fittest, in action. But they do not show evolution in progress. For however the populations may alter in their
Okay. I'd like to preface my response with this. There have been a lot of things that have come to light since Darwin. And Darwin was wrong about many things. He was never perfect, and he was the first person to pioneer the idea of evolution. That means that he didn't have a lot of the information that we have today after looking into it more. Let's continue this.
Content of light, intermediate, or dark forms, all the moths remain from beginning to end Biston bitularia.
Okay. I bet what he's going to do in a second is he's going to split hairs between microevolution and macroevolution. It's important to realize that microevolution causes macroevolution. There are no barriers, genetically or physically speaking, between what microevolution does and what macroevolution is. There is absolutely nothing separating the two.
As for the pesticide resistance argument, more than 15 years ago, leading evolutionary biologist Francisco Ayala wrote, "Resistance to one or more pesticides has been reported in at least 225 species of insects and other arthropods. The genetic variants required for resistance to the most diverse kinds of pesticides were apparently present in every one of the populations exposed to these man-made compounds. What happened was simply that the resistant ones already present survived, while..."
Okay. This is really fucking dumb because it admits that there are genetic variants. It admits that the ones with the genetic variant are the only ones that would have survived. But then completely denies that that is what natural selection is. That is what natural selection is. It's not something happens and then an individual develops the resistance afterwards. The ones that had already had that random mutation were then selected by the selection pressure of the pesticides, and the ones with that random mutation were the ones that survived. That is natural selection. That is exactly what natural selection is.
All the others were killed. The survivors passed on the genetic information for this resistance, which therefore became more common in subsequent generations. No new information arose, yet this is what evolution is supposed to be all about.
The new information was the pesticide resistance. That was the new information. That was the new genetic information, was the pesticide resistance.
In fact, some information would have been lost as a result of the non-resistance.
Okay, let me just ask a question to all of the fucking young earth creationists out there. What do you think caused there to be some that had the resistance to the pesticides? Why was there that genetic variant in the beginning? It's a mutation that added information that allowed them to survive. That is the answer to that question.
Resistant organisms being wiped out, as they would likely carry some genes not present in the survivors. So according to the testimony of leading evolutionists, both of these examples do not show evolution in progress, yet years later, the same examples are still presented.
Once again, it's natural selection. That's what happened with the peppered moths, too. That's exactly... Oh, God, I came up... That's a stupid joke. Salt and pepper moths, whatever. But that just came to my mind, and I had to say it. But, it's just... It's natural selection. You're completely foregoing the obvious question of why were they different from the beginning.
As top-ranking observational evidence for evolution. Above, you wrote, "Evolution has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt many times over. Ignoring it, denying it as you do, does not change the facts. And yet the examples you gave have been debunked by leading evolutionists. This should give you..."
No, they haven't. Um, okay, so first of all, that second quote was quote mined for only the information you wanted to have. Um, he did not say anything that would debunk I think he was talking about the insects growing immunity to pesticides. He didn't debunk that. You stole part of his quote to prop up your bullshit. And the first quote was from Charles Darwin, who, yeah, he knew a lot for his time, but compared to what we know now, is just a single speck in the cosmos.
Pause and make you ask, why was I so confident these were examples of evolution? And are there other things I believe that aren't true? Growing up as an atheist myself, I was offended to learn that what I had been told were rock-solid examples of evolution, such as Piltdown Man, Haeckel's embryo.
Okay, Piltdown Man was one of those, super incredibly, very clearly fake scams in the circles of science. But but you know what's a very common and almost synonymous thing with all of these examples, with all of the fucking, all of the not conspiracies, what's the word? Controversies in the field of science, that they were all disproven incredibly quickly by science. Piltdown Man was very clearly shown to be fake very quickly. Haeckel's embryo drawings, I'm pretty sure that was just... I'm pretty sure that was the one that was, that... Pretty sure he was the guy who made the drawings, like, over 100 years ago. If he is, his drawings weren't thrown out, they were just substituted for better images. Like, it wasn't like, oh no, this guy's drawings were fake. Like, no, we just had better examples, and we used the better examples. And the peppered moths, I already went over that. It's natural selection. And just because you don't understand natural selection does not mean that it's wrong.
Embryo drawings and peppered moths were fraudulent. Even atheistic evolutionist Dr. Jerry Coyne said finding out about the peppered moth example wasn't true was like learning Santa wasn't real. To which she replied, "Man, you will always find people who do not agree with..."
We're not gonna look at ChatGPT today. Let's see. I love desktop sticky notes. I use them for everything, including keeping track of ideas for Misconception Monday posts. At the top of this stack is this. Things that people think are controversial, but aren't. Peppered moth, horse evolution, embryos, etc. I realize, however, that these topics aren't exactly misconceptions, as they are examples of what happens when a little bad journalism or sloppy science runs amok. But they're still worth talking about, so I've opted to go ahead anyway. Peppered moths, we all know the story, right? There are two variations among peppered moths. I'm not going to attempt to say that. In England, light typica and dark carbonaria. Before the Industrial Revolution, the vast majority of moths were of the typica variety. As England became powered by coal and the landscape descended into sooty Dickensian bleakness, there was a major shift. As the trees blackened with soot, the carbonaria variety came to predominate. Then, when the air cleaned up, the distribution of variations shifted back, and the typica moths are once again more common. So this is a classic. This is classic natural selection, right? Dark moths are easy to see against light trees. Light moths are easy to see against dark trees. Pre-soot, post-soot. Dark moths equals easy prey for birds. Mid-soot, light moths, easy prey for birds. You might say that whether a moth survives predation is a matter of whether it's suited, oh, it's a pun. A British ecologist, H.B.D. Kettlewell, carried out a series of studies in the 1950s that confirmed these hypotheses. He wrote, had Darwin observed industrial melanism, he would have seen evolution occurring, not in thousands of years, but in thousands of days. Well, within his lifetime. He would have witnessed the consummation of and confirmation of his life's work. So compelling is, wait a second. If he didn't live through that, how the fuck would he have made a quote on it? Did they forge a fucking quote? Oh my god, that's fucking hilarious. I was questioning whether or not he was alive during that. I was like, wait. But I decided to trust that he wouldn't just outright fucking lie. But apparently I shouldn't have trusted that. So compelling is this example of evolution by natural selection that it became a textbook staple. Open any biology textbook published before about 2000 and you're likely to find photos of typica moths and carbonaria moths against either clean or sooty tree trunks. The moths in these photos are dead, preserved and stuck onto the tree trunks as part of an experiment to assess the effect of moth density on the feeding behavior of the birds that feed on them. At least according to Bruce Grant. Who knows this stuff better than anyone? Unfortunately, people seized on this perhaps not exactly elegant experimental setup and cried foul. Kettlewell was called a fraud and a fake, and scientists and textbook developers alike were accused of participating in a conspiracy to trick our children into believing natural selection. The moths became pariahs in some circles. Alright, so that's very telling, is that nobody actually disproved the theory. They just didn't like how somebody was trying to prove it. But the thing is, there is nothing wrong with the peppered moths as an example of natural selection in action. In the late 1990s, biologist Michael Ian Majerus? I'm not sure. Re-examined Kettlewell's work and confirmed all of his major findings. He is not the only one. Since Kettlewell's original experiments were published, they have been independently replicated repeatedly. Each time, color variation among moths is linked to different fitness that affects differential fitness that affects the distribution of the color trait. Okay, so yeah. Basically, this guy's full of shit.
What is generally accepted. Again, 97% of the world accepts evolution. You believe the 3%. I stick with the 97%. Good day, no further comment. The fact is, the average layperson with just a little apologetics training can easily poke holes in the examples like I used earlier.
And the average high schooler with just a little bit of environmental science classes can poke holes in your bullshit.
And parroted by our visitor.
Although I did graduate, but, you know, it's like a few months away from my graduation. Like, I'm 18, man, and I'm able to poke holes in your fucking shoddy arguments.
Debbie, and articulate how they are abject failures in demonstrating evolution in action.
They're only failures if you misunderstand them.
And because of the embarrassment of having to deal with the fallout, some of naturalism's foremost promoters have changed tactics. For example,
I'm embarrassed on your behalf, man. I gotta know, did you write the script for this one, or did one of your superiors? I don't know who this guy is. Is he fucking... I don't know who this guy is. Who is he? Calvin Smith.
fanatical atheist Richard Dawkins came out and admitted nobody has actually seen evolution take place over a long period, but they have seen the after effects, and the after effects are massively supported. It's like a case in...
Let's see. Series 1, October 11th, 2008. I assume that's when the book was published. Which means that he probably, had been thinking about this maybe a year, maybe two before this. So, around 2007, 2006, we have a lot more evidence now. And I bet this one was quote mined too. Or maybe it's a fucking fabrication like they did with fucking Charles Darwin. That's really embarrassing for you, man. Oh, whoops.
In a court of law where nobody can actually stand up and say, I saw the murder happen. And yet you've got millions and millions of pieces of evidence which no reasonable person can possibly dispute.
So basically, you're saying... This guy said, nobody's actually seen evolution happen, but we have mountains of evidence for it. I'm surprised he didn't just fucking, just clip it at where he said nobody has actually seen evolution happen. The difference is we've seen microevolution. We've seen what happens after microevolution happens a bunch of times, which is macroevolution. We see microevolution. We see the result of microevolution, which is macroevolution. So how can you say that macroevolution doesn't exist?
But of course, in a court of law, everyone is observing the same group of facts and interpreting it as evidence.
I'm sorry, but there's a lot of people who have been convicted without a witness. That doesn't... Are you saying that all of the people who have been convicted without a witness are innocent? Because actually, was there a witness to what O.J. Simpson did? Do you think O.J. Simpson is innocent? Do you think any murderer who isn't caught in the act of butchering somebody is innocent?
Towards their own presuppositional position, innocent or guilty. And the facts we observe in nature make way more sense when interpreted according to the biblical narrative than towards the story of evolution. Adding more fuel to the fire, Dawkins has also said, evolution has been observed. It's just that it hasn't been observed.
Wait. Oh. Yeah, it hasn't been observed while it's happening because it can't. What, do you want to watch the life of every generation? From life till death? Like, you can't actually go out and look at evolution. That's not how it works. But you can test it, and you can form hypotheses and test those hypotheses. You can't see gravity either, but you can test how it works.
While it's happening. Which, as I've said before, is kind of like someone declaring they have the superpower of invisibility, which unfortunately only works when no one's...
We couldn't see many of the planets in our skies 200, 300, sometimes even 500 years ago. Maybe it was thousands. I'm not entirely sure on the timeline, but we were able to simply find out that they existed through calculating the forces we knew existed.
Looking at them. So which is it? Can evolution be observed or not? Honestly,
its effects and its base causes can be observed. That's pretty much the same thing as knowing it exists.
Dawkins' statement is a bit of a stunner for the world's leading atheistic evangelist to admit, because Dawkins is the former chair of public understanding of knowledge of science at Oxford University. If no one has seen evolution...
And so far, he hasn't actually said anything damning towards evolution. You've just quote-mined the fuck out of his fucking books.
Occurring in real time, it means it isn't in the realm of empirical science, which is what Answers in Genesis has always taught, but rather historical science, where facts are open to various interpretations with the possibility of alternative explanations. And this is why you'll almost always hear me use the phrase, the story of evolution, rather than the theory of evolution. And that's because legitimate scientific theories have observational experimentation that helps.
We have experimented on evolution. We have done that. Just because you don't want to believe it does not mean it's not true.
Verify them. Truthfully, with no observational experiment in support of it whatsoever, evolution should be described as a hypothesis at best. However, for those that have grown up in the state-run schools promoting...
This guy clearly doesn't know what a hypothesis or a theory is just by that alone.
Evolutionary indoctrination, like myself here in Canada, many
Bro, you're the one indoctrinating people. You dumb fuck.
evolution believers like Debbie still think that evolution is a fact and has been observed.
It is a fact. Its causes and effects have been observed. We have seen its causes and effects. We know it exists.
Even better example comes from one of Richard Dawkins' faithful supporters' posts on his own website, richarddawkins.net, who commented on Dawkins' quote I mentioned earlier, admitting no one had observed evolution. He actually critiqued Dawkins, saying he should have added that many people have seen evolution over a short period, resulting in varieties or similar species, and no one has found any barrier preventing such changes from accumulating to form greater differences.
Which is exactly what I was saying before, where I was saying that there is no barrier between microevolution and macroevolution. That's pretty much the same thing I said.
Can you see how Dawkins' student still believes the commonly cited proofs of observed evolution, such as the peppered moth, insects evolving DD?
Once again, those are great examples of natural selection. One of the causes of evolution. And what we saw of the peppered moths changing in variety, and what we see of the actual genetic information that we see of the insects being resistant to the pesticides, that is the... Oh my god, this is a pain in the ass to keep explaining. That is the after effect of evolution.
T resistance, bacteria evolving, etc., and that they demonstrate evolution has been observed, while the expert admits it hasn't been observed. And this is...
He said it has been observed, but he also said it hasn't been observed. Notice how that's a little dodgy. Maybe it's because he was contradicting himself, or maybe it's because you took those quotes out of context, you fuck.
This has been happening for a while now. Now, although it might be hard to believe, in 2008, the director of the National Center for Science Education, Dr. Eugenie Scott, criticized creationists in a presentation for one, preferring direct observation to inferential explanation, and two, insisting evolutionists should provide observational evidence for their belief. You heard that correctly. Instead of providing observational evidence of evolution happening, she declared that science doesn't require direct observation.
Because it doesn't. Do you directly observe the Earth going around the sun? Obviously, flat earthers are idiots, but are you a flat earther? Do we observe the Earth going around the sun? Do we observe from multiple angles of all the other planets going around the sun? For the most part, we don't. Not the people who were on the Earth, and 500 years ago, which we were able to fucking calculate that shit. We didn't have people off the planet, and they were able to figure it out without directly observing it. It's not necessary to directly observe something to know it exists.
And that evolutionary scientists can figure out what happened in the past based on observations in the present. And to make her point, she used a picture of a paint stripe overtop some cow dung stamped on a highway as an example of how we can logically infer from the evidence conclusions about the order of events never directly seen.
And that's a good point.
I.e., it was obvious that the road existed before the cow dung on top of it, which in turn existed before the paint stripe that was placed over it.
Exactly. Exactly.
This idea of arguing from an analogy is similar to what creationists have done.
And let me expand upon that too, because technically all you see is the road, the cow dung, and the stripe. Well, you can infer from prior knowledge that the stripe was made of paint, and that somebody made that stripe. So, because you can see that there, you can actually infer that somebody actually made that stripe over the cow dung. You can infer that. You can infer all of that without actually seeing it happen.
And for years now, to support the unobserved historical events recorded in God's Word. Except the examples we have used are a direct blow to the story of evolution, rather than an obviously trivial example of cows doing their thing.
All of your examples have been bullshit or lies.
On highways, for example, when we see fossilized trees standing upright through several meters of sedimentary rock.
I'm not gonna go over this again. I went over this in, who was it? It was a different creationist video. I think he was also a part of Answers in Genesis, too. I already went over this. I'm not gonna do this
Rock layers.
again, but there is actual scientific evidence of how this happens, and there is actual, like, scientists have gone into this. They know how it happens, and they know why it happens.
We can logically assume the layers were laid down very quickly before the tree rotted away. Why?
Not exactly.
Because dead trees rot at the bottom, dry out at the top, and then fall over shortly after they die. Obviously,
And, oh man, I don't want to go into this. Rock moves underground. Some cases of these trees being upright may have been caused by the layers shifting and the tree being maneuvered upright after it had already been fossilized horizontally.
trees wouldn't last standing up if it took several thousand years for sediments to build up around them. Also, when we see
and that is just one of many reasons why this could have happened.
Fossilized soft tissue containing red blood vessels, cells, amino acid sequences, collagen, etc. inside fossilized dinosaur bones, we assume they formed recently, perhaps thousands of years ago, but certainly not millions, because known chemical decomposition rates simply wouldn't allow for soft tissue to last for 65 plus million.
I've already went over this too. Things don't decay where there is nothing to make them decay. And I actually heard a great example of this. And it's that is it the Arctic or the Antarctic where penguins are? I think is whatever the one in the south is. In the south, freezing region, God, I sound stupid. But in the south where penguins live, it's so cold that the bacteria that make things decompose, they aren't there. So around where penguins live, the penguin shit will build up. So if you're close enough to see penguins, you're close enough to smell them.
In years. And when you see things that have design features like a motor, a robot, etc., you can logically assume there was a designer. So when we see similar but vastly more complicated things in nature like the ATP synthase motor or the kinesin motor protein, we assume they were created by a master designer.
Okay. So the difference between that is that there are a whole slew of reasons why we know that a robot was actually made by a person. Chief among them is that we know it's an invention. We know that electronics are made by people, so we can then infer that a moving electronical body was obviously made by somebody. There is no evidence that flesh was made by somebody. There is no evidence that the basic elements that make up the human body were made by somebody. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary. There's evidence that the basic elements in the human body are made by star fusion and explosion. So, no, there is no reason to believe that the human body was made by a master designer.
Similarly, because it's our universal experience that whenever we see information in the form of a coded language system, it has always originated through an intelligent mind, we can assume that the most sophisticated code system we've ever seen, DNA, came from the most sophisticated mind we can imagine, God. So, for
Nope, no evidence for that. Don't say that.
those evolutionists retreating into arguments from analogy, come on in, the water's warm. We welcome them to our world because it will likely prove to be quite damaging to their belief systems, as all of the conclusion.
If any Christians want to deconstruct their faith, I'm all ears. I'm happy to help. God knows too many people believe in this shit. And before you morons say, "Oh, well, you just said God knows," it's a saying, dumbass.
I just gave will likely prove devastating to evolutionary presuppositions, as the average person can see. They not only provide strong evidence against evolution's required millions of years time frame, but also support the Bible's young Earth time frame and provide direct evidence of a creator, such as Romans 1:20 describes. For his
Alright, so absolutely no evidence. And I can't get over the fact that he just fucking forged a quote, which is really fucking funny to me. Because apparently quote mining wasn't enough for him. It wasn't enough to take real quotes out of context, but they just had to just completely fabricate a quote, too. That's funny. Anyways, send me flat earth videos. Send me flat earth videos. I need flat earth stuff to debunk because YouTube really liked that.